In 1924, a new Grand Prix car first appeared. It was destined to become the most successful racing car of all time. Designed and constructed by an Italian living in France, who called it simply his Type 35. His name, Ettore Bugatti. From 1924 to 1930, 350 Bugattis flooded onto the racing circuits of Europe, enabling France to assume a dominant position. There then followed a three-cornered struggle between France, Italy and Germany, which was to produce some of the most exciting racing ever seen between Grand Prix cars which have become legendary. Bugatti had been the early pacemaker, and during the 30s the cars raced on in the hands of amateur drivers. Yet how Bugatti had created the car remains an enigma, for his previous designs had given little hint of what was to follow. The Type 29, for example, which was entered for the French Grand Prix at Strasbourg in 1922. The meeting was over 500 miles and the muddy circuit was in an appalling condition. The race developed into a duel between Bugatti and Fiat. The Bugattis were doing well over 115 miles an hour on the straights, but their brakes and road holding still needed development. Two of the Fiats had dropped out, but Nazzaro's overtook the leading Bugatti to win the race, as this contemporary print shows. The next year, Bugatti decided on a fully streamlined car. It was unkindly dubbed the Tank. The tanks were certainly fast, but their wheelbase was too short, and they handled badly on the fast circuit at Tours. Consequently, Seagrave, on a British Sunbeam, won the 1923 French Grand Prix. At the end of the year, the Bugatti tanks were sold, and he produced a completely new car, the Type 35. It's difficult now to reconcile the appearance of this most elegant car with its unlikely forebears. The beautifully constructed 2-litre engine had 8 cylinders in line, a straight 8. It was fed by 2 simple carburetors and produced a modest 90 horsepower. The secret of the Type 35 Bugatti lay in its workmanship, together with excellent steering, brakes and suspension, all of which produced unsurpassed road holding for its day. The pleasing body, which set a trend for racing cars, might have been influenced by the 1923 Fiats. Nevertheless, when the new Bugattis first appeared for the 1924 French Grand Prix at Lyon, they created a sensation. Among the opposition was another new car, the Italian P2 Alfa Romeo. But Seagrave's Sunbeam led from the start. Before 100,000 spectators, the Sunbeam broke the lap record, but then began to misfire, allowing the Alphas to overtake. The new Bugattis, which had been going well, also unaccountably began to slow down. Fredericks loses control. Vizcaya runs into a stone wall. At the Bugatti pit, the reason for the accidents is clear: tyre failure. The new and much admired Bugatti alloy wheels had been designed with the idea of making brake adjustments quickly. But, always original, Bugatti had specified a non-standard tyre size, and the batch hastily produced for the race had proved faulty. The Fiats too drop out. And so, with the Fiats, Sunbeam and Bugattis out of the running, an Alfa Romeo driven by Campari wins. In those days, they drank the champagne. Seagrave's Sunbeam had finished 5th, its misfiring traced to faulty magnetos. This is Seagrave's 1924 car with one of the surviving Lyon Grand Prix Bugattis. The Sunbeam seems lacking in refinement, but in one way it is the more technically advanced. Its engine is supercharged. The first successfully supercharged engine was the American Miller 91 with its large centrifugal blower, geared from the engine to 50,000 RPM, forcing the mixture into the cylinders. But such compressors are only efficient at high speed. At Indianapolis in America, there are gently banked curves. The cars run flat out for the entire race. The supercharger boosted the speeds up to 150 miles an hour, but the overstressed engines often failed, causing catastrophic accidents. The Sunbeam was the first European Grand Prix car to be successfully supercharged by compressing the mixture, a petrol-air charge from the carburetor. Pumping the mixture into the cylinders at 10 pounds per square inch to supercharge them, thus producing an additional 30 horsepower. The blower used was different from the Miller centrifugal type. It was far more efficient, consisting of 2 figure-of-8 paddles intermeshing rather like an egg beater, compressing the mixture. The Roots compressor, as it's known, possesses the virtue of efficiency at low speeds. It could pressurize the induction system even when the engine was idling, enabling the Sunbeam to accelerate cleanly away from a slow corner, which a centrifugal supercharger could not do. After the disappointment of Tours, Seagrave won the Spanish Grand Prix, the last time a British car and driver would win a Grand Prix for the next 30 years. Bugatti declined to countenance supercharging, declaring it unsporting. There might, however, have been another, more practical reason, as Hugh Conway, the Bugatti authority, explains.
Bugatti was a strange mixture of instinctive design ability and lack of technical competence, and he certainly wasn't able to design a supercharger himself. In fact, in the end, he got somebody else to do it for him. But he objected, one suspects, because he hadn't got one available, and he would have been handicapped it was as a result of not having one.
In 1926, the formula changed to 1.5 litres supercharged. Even Bugatti knew that he would have to use a compressor to remain competitive. His blown 1.5 litre cars easily won the French Grand Prix that year, for the very good reason that the only cars entered were 3 Bugattis. But in the wings, there were other contenders, principally the straight-8 Delage. The Delage was a completely new design. The supercharger was driven from the crankshaft drawing the mixture through a large carburettor. But the intricate engine, which incorporated no fewer than 60 ball or roller bearings, proved costly to produce. The last race of 1927 was also the last Grand Prix held at the Brooklands track. A Delage driven by Benoit won. It was the end of the unpopular 1.5-litre formula. Because of the cost, the days of factory support were drawing to a close. Only 7 straight-8 Delages were ever built, though this one, driven by the young English driver Dick Seaman, was to win major races 9 years later. From 1928, Grand Prix racing was to Formula Libre, which produced some unlikely contenders, such as this 4.5-litre Bentley. Bentley's sports car had won the Le Mans 24-hour race in 1928. To try to repeat this feat in 1929, a supercharger was added, which boosted the output of the engine from 125 to 240 horsepower. The blower Bentleys, as they were called, did not win at Le Mans. But Sir Henry Birkin entered a stripped 4.5-litre Bentley in the 1930 French Grand Prix at Pau in southwest France. The Bentley, number 18, towered above the field. Birkin on the Bentley passed the pits at around 130 miles an hour and overtook car after car to the amazement of the crowd. Only one Bugatti, driven by Philippe Étincelin, remained in front of the Bentley, and the fastest lorry in the world, as Bugatti is reported to have called it, came second. Étincelin, the winner, was driving a factory-entered Bugatti. What kind of contract would he have had? Hugh Conway.
It's quite clear an awful lot of the drivers asked if they might drive and actually paid their own expenses in order to drive racing cars in those happy days. One or two of them had some sort of contract, although we know for a fact that people like Chiron used to get given cars rather than money, which they were then able to sell. I don't think many of the drivers for Bugatti received much in the way of a fee.
There was no shortage of Bugatti drivers during 1930, but the Type 35's engine, though then supercharged and enlarged to 2.3 litres, only had a single overhead camshaft, and Bugatti realised it was becoming dated.
Well, he knew by the end of 1929 that he was being outclassed on power. That was quite clear. And there's a complicated story, but he did acquire a couple of American Miller cars, which had been left by an American in Europe, and took them to pieces and, in fact, copied the engine exactly in a version of the 35 called the Type 51. And that produced about 30 more horsepower than he'd ever seen before for a given size of engine.
The Miller engine had a double overhead camshaft, one for the inlet, another for the exhaust valves, set at an angle of 90 degrees, improving the gas flow and thus increasing the power. The new engine was fitted to the Type 51 Bugatti. Horizon invited Grand Prix driver John Watson to test a meticulously restored example.
Okay, catch it. Well, I think the engine, certain performance, the engine is very impressive. It's got what I would call lusty power, and it really does pull from low down. And I never really got it running at its maximum RPM, but you can feel that sort of thrust and urge, which is very impressive. The gearboxes I find a little bit difficult because I'm not so used to this kind of gearbox. But otherwise, it's very pleasant indeed. The thing that I felt driving it was how much harder it is to drive, because you have to drive much more physically. And on my shoulders, I mean, after the few laps around here, having to pull the wheel around, I felt really worn out. And I can't imagine how they drove for the length of time they did do many years ago. At first I was very nervous about it, but now that I'm more accustomed to it, I can understand why the owners of these cars enjoy them so much. You know, the more I've been driving it, the more I'm beginning to enjoy it, and it actually feels like a car, rather more than maybe the current Grand Prix cars do, because they are very much more refined.
Brooklands in Surrey, until 1933 the only British circuit. The races were mainly for sports cars which had to be silenced. Local residents insisted on that. But the Bentleys, Bugattis and MGs raced round the bumpy banking most weekends. It was all the greatest possible fun.
Look, here's Dorothy coming. Thrilling hill win.
Brooklands is no more. It closed in September 1939, forever. A K3 MG, which often raced here, drives along one of the few remaining sections. The passenger is Bill Boddy, editor of Motorsport and Brooklands historian.
Lap record was 143.44 by an aero-engine Napier Railton. John Cobb said it felt like leaning too far out an upstairs window, further than you want to lean out for comfort. He was a pretty placid man, so if he said that, he must have, thought it was slightly fraught.
Neither the drivers nor the select summer crowd at Brooklands cared much about Grand Prix racing. That was a European sport. Most of the races here were handicaps. No previous experience was necessary.
You come down here on a weekday and pay 10 shillings to go around anything you like. I came with my mother once. We went around in 1928, I think, Armstrong Siddeley 14. It wouldn't do more than about 45. All the tires fell off after about 100 yards, But they didn't worry a bit. And I'm quite sure at the end of the day, they didn't even count the heads. I mean, if you'd had an accident somewhere and you were in the ditch, I think that's where you'd probably have stayed. It's all terribly carefree.
But not always. To keep a Bentley at 130 miles an hour on the banking called for great skill and judgment. A single error could lead to disaster. The Tunis Grand Prix of 1933. A Bugatti is harried by the Italian Alfa Romeos and Maseratis. The cars are driven by an entirely new generation of professional drivers who sell their skills to the highest bidder. Like the winner of this race, Tazio Nuvolari, destined to become one of the greats, as was his intense rival, Achille Varzi. The duel between these two Italian drivers during the 1933 Monaco Grand Prix remains an epic of motor racing. Of the 100 laps of the race, Nuvolari on a 2.3 Monza Alfa led for 66. Varzi on a Type 51 Bugatti for 34, with never more than a car's length between them. The rest of the field, which included Étincelin and Borzacchini, became mere supporting players. Towards the end of the race, Varzi took the lead. Nuvolari immediately retook it. Varzi broke the lap record. Nuvolari repassed him, and as both cars raced for the finish, their drivers grossly over-revved their engines. Varzi's went up to 7,500 RPM, but kept running. Nuvolari's blew up. It was a famous victory, but one of the last for Bugatti. The previous year, Bugatti had not achieved a single major win. Sadly, the time had come for his beautiful cars to make their exit, to become a legend. A legend which lives on, for surviving Bugattis, worth around £120,000 apiece, are raced still. In 1934, Maserati had produced a new 3.3-litre car. It was built to the international formula which began that year. There was no restriction on engine capacity or supercharging, but the total weight of the car, curiously without tyres, fuel or driver, was not to exceed 750 kilograms. Bugatti competed with his Type 59, which was virtually his last Grand Prix car. Though beautifully constructed, it retained such outdated features as cable-operated brakes and was powered by what was essentially a sports car engine. Although riding mechanics had long since been banished, the Type 59 remained a two-seater and, eccentrically, was cranked from the side. The rising cost of construction by 1934 was such that Bugatti was never able to develop the Type 59. By far the most successful of the trio was the Type B Alfa Romeo. The car had been steadily developed over 10 years. With the capacity of its superb supercharged straight-eight engine increased to 3.2 litres, it was at the very peak of its development. Like the earlier P3 Alfa, which it closely resembled, the Type B had the classic monoposto, or single-seater driving position. John Watson tested this, the final development of the classic racing car that had first appeared 10 years earlier as the Type 35 Bugatti.
It's a three-speed gearbox. First is straight up, then round and up is second, straight down for third.
Are we just going to use second and third today?
Just stick to second and third, that'll be enough. Fuel valves here on the left, vertically up is on, and the mag switch is over there on the right as marked.
The two rev counters, that's a strange thing to have.
Well, tradition. They read roughly the same.
Ah.
OK, John, right, have some fun. Stick your boot in.
Oh, I'll do my best.
This Alfa is still capable of 150 miles an hour, so John Watson takes no chances.
It's a very impressive car because it's very powerful. And to imagine that drivers, Nuvolari in particular, drove these cars at Nürburgring and circuits like that, which are extremely bumpy, and the car hasn't got a sophisticated suspension. It just puts into perspective how good those drivers were in their day. Really, you only need 2 gears, second and third gear, because it's got so much torque, so much low down power. 1,000 revs in second gear up to 5.5, the limit, that in any corner or hairpin bend, you just go into it and put the throttle on, out it shoots. There's no need to go down to bottom gear to get it out of a corner. If you could take this kind of engine response, and put it in a current car, it would be fantastic.
But there was another competitor to be considered, Germany. In 1923, this Mercedes had won the Sicilian Targa Florio. Until 1934, Germany had been excluded from the French and Belgian Grand Prix, though Mercedes sports cars, such as this rare SSK, competed in a 500-mile race at Brooklands, driven by Zehnder and Prince Georgiadze. It retired. Mercedes sports cars also competed in the Ulster TT, though their immense size put them at a disadvantage on the narrow, twisting Ards course when against such agile cars as the 1750 Alfa Romeos. But a 7.1-litre Mercedes won in 1929, driven by the brilliant young German driver Rudolf Caracciola. The last Mercedes Grand Prix car had been produced in 1926, so a new modern racing design was clearly essential for the 1934 750-kilogram formula. Work began in 1933. Soon, in the Mercedes-Benz racing department at Stuttgart, craftsmen began meticulously to assemble a prototype engine to power the new car. It was designated W25, and unlike the contemporary French and Italian contenders, owed little to the past. The engine was initially 3.3 litres and supercharged by a large Roots blower, pressurizing the carburettor, creating the characteristic scream of these cars. Even in its early form, the straight-eight engine produced over 400 horsepower. The body was carefully streamlined to reduce drag, and independently sprung wheels offered the road holding required at a speed of 175 miles an hour. The gearbox was in a unit with the back axle, which soon became universal for racing cars. The W25 was not the only German design. At Chemnitz, Ferdinand Porsche had designed for Auto Union a most unusual rear-engined car, commonplace now, but unexplored territory in 1934. Auto Union also began construction in 1933. The firm was a consortium created by Hoch, Wanderer, DKW and Audi. The 1934 Auto Union had a blown V16 engine producing 300 horsepower, giving the car a maximum speed of 170 miles an hour. All four wheels were independently sprung, which theoretically offered good road holding. When driven on the track, however, the handling was suspect. The first race in which both Auto Union and Mercedes competed was the Eifel-Rennen, held in June 1934 over 15 laps of the 14-mile Nürburgring. Mercedes led the race, driven by von Brauchitsch and the Italian driver Luigi Fagioli. The Auto Union of Hans Stuck challenged, as did the Alpha of Louis Chiron. The sight and sound of the new German cars was awe-inspiring, but all was not well. Fagioli was harassing his teammate von Brauchitsch. Fagioli, though leading, had been ordered to drop behind to second place. Enraged, the Italian simply abandoned his perfectly sound car, leaving von Brauchitsch to win, with Stuck second on the Auto Union. Korpsführer Adolf Hühnlein salutes the victor. The French Grand Prix held at Montlhéry near Paris. It's the first international race for the German team outside their own country, and the first French Grand Prix since 1914, when Germany swept the board, a defeat the French crowd dearly wished to see avenged. But team manager Alfred Neubauer is confident of a German, if not a Mercedes, victory. 80,000 spectators had gathered as the course was diplomatically closed by a Bugatti, a Lancia and a Mercedes-Benz representing the three competing nations. As they were pushed to the starting line, the German cars were a revelation. 22 is to be handled by von Brauchitsch, 30 by Fagioli. All of Europe's finest Grand Prix drivers are on the grid as the seconds tick away. Chiron jumps the start from the third row and is off like a rocket. The German cars chase the elusive Alfa. Fagioli breaks the lap record. Chiron replies at 91.35 miles an hour. The Alfa is being driven flat out. Only Stuck on the Auto Union succeeds in overtaking the French driver. In contrast to the Alfas and Bugattis, the road holding of the Auto Unions and Mercedes is most impressive. But Neubauer is worried. Fagioli is slowed by failing brakes, so the two remaining Mercedes drivers are signaled to speed up. Chiron passes the grandstand, still in the lead. Stuck's Auto Union is failing, so is the Mercedes of Brauchitsch. Neither can catch Chiron's Alfa. Caracciola is called in for a routine pit stop. Mercedes pit work will become legendary, but this stop takes an unbelievable 80 seconds. Later, 25 will be average, and electric starters will be used. German radio, confident of a German victory, are relaying the race live, but have little good news to report as Fagioli, then Brauchitsch slow down, soon to retire, the latter with supercharger trouble. Two Auto Unions are also out. Only Stuck and Caracciola are left running as Chiron leads, with Varzi and another P3 Alfa now in second place. Then, as Caracciola's car develops gearbox trouble, Neubauer knows the race is lost. The Mercedes drivers are reduced to spectators in the pits, and Stuck's Auto Union too finally fails him. The German challenge is over. Varzi is still in second place, and Count Trossi's Alfa third. As Chiron passes the grandstand to start his final lap, the pressmen gather to record the finish of one of the greatest of French Grand Prix. It is Chiron's finest victory, achieved in a technically outmoded car. The press begin to dismiss the German comeback into Grand Prix racing. But in Stuttgart, at the end of the 1934 season, the Mercedes team are greeted as heroes for the races which they did win: the German Eifelrennen, the Coppa Acerbo at Pescara in Italy, and the Spanish Grand Prix. Monaco, the first Grand Prix of 1935. Fagioli leads from the start, followed by Caracciola and von Brauchitsch. But von Brauchitz's race was soon over with transmission trouble. Auto unions hadn't entered. The only competition is from Alfas and Maseratis. Caracciola, harried by Étincelin on a blown 3-litre Maserati, broke a valve spring, leaving Fagioli with an unchallenged victory. Fagioli's next race at Tripoli would be harder, however, for the opposition would include 2 auto unions, one driven by Varzi. Chiron is greeted by Marshal Balbo, the governor. Mercedes' main opposition is the 2 P3 auto unions, with their engines enlarged to 4.95 litres. Nuvolari with the Bimotore Alfa, with 2 3.2-litre blown engines. It is very fast and very difficult. The Malaha circuit outside Tripoli is the fastest of all the pre-war European venues. Caracciola, trying to pass Varzi, put up a new lap record at 136.8 miles an hour. Then Varzi had to make a pit stop to replace a burst tyre when in the lead, enabling Caracciola to win at an average speed of 123 miles an hour. The opening race of the 1936 season was at Po. No German cars were entered. This was the kind of racing for which the 750-kilogram formula was devised: relatively low-powered Alfas, Bugattis and Maseratis. Étincelin drove a supercharged 3-litre Maserati. Which won? Monaco, Easter 1936. The weather will not be as bad again until 1984, when the race will be abandoned. But that's out of the question in 1936. In the rain, Caracciola had no equal. Nuvolari, then at his peak, is slowed down with failing brakes. Bernd Rosemeyer, in an auto union, crashes, and as do several others, including Fagioli. The field eventually being reduced from 18 starters to 8 who finish. The winner, Rudolf Caracciola, the only man who could master such appalling conditions. It rained also in the Eifel Mountains for the Eifelrennen, held on the 14-mile Nürburgring circuit. The 1936 Mercedes cars have 450 horsepower engines, revised suspension, and a shorter wheelbase than the 1935 cars, but they do not handle as well. And as the Eiffel mist closed in, Bernd Rosemeyer, Auto Union's rising star, appeared through the gloom to win. "1936 was really Auto Union's year, and a concerned Mercedes-Benz engaged a brilliant young German engineer, Rudolf Uhlenhaut.
I joined the racing team at the end of the season, 1936. And this is the car we began to develop for the season 1937. We built 10 cars for each season.
They are the legendary W125s, with the engine enlarged to 5.6 litres to produce 640 horsepower. But to keep within the 750 kilogram limit, it's lightly built and rough running.
As long as the engine was rough, we knew it was all right. But if it became smooth, we knew that the crankshaft had begun to crack, and it was time to put in a new one.
And a new driver, the young Englishman Dick Seaman. Seaman had been invited to join Mercedes after his brilliant drive on the old straight-eight Delage number 16, when he won the 1936 Junior Car Club 200 at Donington. Seaman had beaten the Works ERAs, driven by Earl Howe and Raymond Mays. He was to drive in the Vanderbilt Cup races at the Roosevelt Raceway, New York. Rex Mays, the American driver, drove a 3.8 Alpha, which proved no match for the Seaman Mercedes, who was to finish second, his first placing for the German team. But the race was won by an auto union driven by Bernd Rosemeyer at 82.46 miles an hour. An ex-motorcycle champion, Rosemeyer was the only driver really to master the early rear-engine auto union. The Nürburgring shortly before the start of the 1937 German Grand Prix. This unique colour footage was shot by the English writer and photographer George Monkhouse, who spent the 1937 season with the Mercedes-Benz team. Mercedes have not won at the ring since 1934, and 350,000 knowledgeable spectators look forward to a great race between the cars from Stuttgart and Chemnitz. Many now consider 1937 as the greatest year in the history of Grand Prix racing. The German cars are so powerful. They can spin their wheels on a dry road up to 150 miles an hour and can touch 200. The supercharged engines produce over 600 horsepower, a figure which would not be exceeded until the advent of turbocharged Formula One cars of the 1980s. The Carousel, an Alfa driver, demonstrates how not to take it. Caracciolo makes it look deceptively simple. So does von Brauchitsch. Rosemeyer leads and breaks the lap record at 85.57 miles an hour, but cannot shake off Caracciolo. But the Auto Union's tyres can't stand the pace, and this pit stop will drop him into third place. Nuvolari is fourth. Caracciolo taking the south curve. Von Brauchitsch at over 150 miles an hour. Nuvolari, with his characteristic extended arm style, corners the big V12 Alfa. Rosemeyer displays his unique mastery of the 6-litre Auto Union. Titans indeed, and an Alfa driver whose day was yet to come, Giuseppe Farina. After 311 miles, the leaders head for the finish, the final order being Caracciolo, von Brauchitsch, Rosemeyer. Caracciolo has averaged 82.7 miles an hour, a record, and 2 miles an hour faster than the 1935 lap record. Caracciola at Pescara for the Coppa Acerbo. Marshal Balbo, the famous Italian airman, and Hans Stuck, filmed by George Monkhouse. What was his opinion of the German team?
Just the sheer efficiency of the whole shooting match when it arrived on the starting line. I mean, everything worked about them. When they put the starter in the front, it started. There was no nonsense.
Von Brauchitsch and Tazio Nuvolari in his famous red helmet. Rosemeyer, in pole position, has broken the Pescara lap record in practice by no fewer than 12 seconds. Neubauer is worried. Seaman has crashed in practice. Only 2 Mercedes will start, but Caracciola is unconcerned, watched by his wife Alice, who's keeping the Mercedes lap charts. Caracciola makes a superb start, but the Auto Union of Rosemeyer is leading at the end of the opening lap. The 16-mile Pescara circuit passed through several villages, and even Rosemeyer finds it tricky. He's hit a kilometre post, buckling a rear wheel. Von Brauchitsch takes the chicane at the start of a 180-mile-an-hour straight, and Alpha follows. Rosemeyer has dropped back when changing his damaged wheel. Caracciola's car is running rough. Neubauer, waving his famous black and red flag, brings him into the pits. German pit work is now disciplined and very fast. The cars only achieve some 3 miles to the gallon and need 70 or 80 at every stop. Zimmer, Mercedes head mechanic, tries to trace the misfiring by touching the exhaust manifolds, looking for a cool one, indicating a faulty plug. All appears well, and Caracciola is sent on his way after only 26 seconds. Rosemeyer comes in for tyres, but will win the race. Von Brauchitsch is second. And Dick Seaman, who's taken over Caracciola's ailing car, is fifth despite a minor engine fire en route. In those days, drivers dressed casually and few wore crash helmets. A week later, George Monkhouse is at Bremgarten to film these British ERAs. These 1.5-litre cars had first appeared in 1934 and competed in voiturette races, roughly equivalent to today's Formula 2. Number 58 is driven by Prince Bira of Siam, a well-known pre-war driver. This is one of his cars. ERA stood for English Racing Automobiles, and 17 of these 1.5-litre supercharged cars were built. They were very successful. They were fitted with a semi-automatic pre-selector gearbox. Most of the ERAs had beam axles with leaf springs bound with cord for rigidity. The success of the 1.5-litre cars did go some way to make up for the lack of a true British Grand Prix car. But at last we had a Grand Prix circuit, Donington Park. British ERAs, despite their rather four-square appearance, competed well. Bira, this time on a Maserati, taking the bumpy Benz at Donington, which this Maserati did not manage to do. The winner of this 1937 Donington 200 was an ERA driven by Arthur Dobson, who collected the £250 first prize. John Watson is to drive a restored ERA, R4B.
Start him first, okay? Right, you want to get the air pressure up to about 3 pounds. Just pump that up, that's fine. Then you've got the ignition switch over there, down for on. Yeah. The gears are 4 forward, 1 reverse, but it's pre-selector. Therefore, you must start off in bottom and then pre-think your gears as you go along. Yeah. And you're okay.
Lovely.
Right. Shop. Right.
To make it more interesting, some other vintage cars have gathered, including the B-Type Alpha and the Bira ERA. John Watson took immediately to the pre-selector gearbox.
It's the first time I've ever driven with one, and I found it very interesting indeed, because driving one of these gearboxes, I can see benefits that are there over what we use conventional gearbox. So it's an interesting little exercise for me to just experience that kind of gear change, because you can take the gear you require at any point on the straight for the forthcoming corner. So 100 yards away or 500 yards away, you could take third gear, for example, if you needed third gear for that corner. All you had to do was brake and then just dip the clutch and you had the gear. It's a very quick car. It probably was the first true single-seater racing car that England produced. And of course it was the forerunner to the BRM, which came after the war. The car was built by Raymond Mays, and he was one of the instigators of the BRM as well.
But ERAs were no match for the German cars entered for the 1937 Donington Grand Prix, as contemporary newsreels acknowledged.
From the start, it's clear that the German cars are going to run away with the honours. 4 times as powerful as the British entrants, they easily leave competitors behind. The pace grows faster and faster, pushing on to an exciting climax, with the winner's average speed at 82.86 miles an hour.
The Donington crowds had never seen anything remotely like it. George Monkhouse was at Donington, and his superb colour footage is unique. Rosemeyer, the winner for Auto Union. It was the last race for the 6-litre German cars. The 1939 formula restricted supercharged engines to a maximum of 3 litres. Sadly, Donington was to be the brilliant young driver Bernd Rosemeyer's last race. The following February, he lost his life during a record attempt on the Autobahn near Darmstadt. The great Nuvolari had already been signed by Auto Union, having test-driven the rear-engined 6-litre car during the 1937 Swiss Grand Prix at Bern. The car he would drive in 1938 conformed to the new 3-litre formula. The 60-degree V12 supercharged engine produced 400 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, the driving position being moved back and the fuel tanks revised. For 1938, Mercedes produced the W154. Its V12 3-litre blown engine produced 420 horsepower at 8,000 RPM. The car represented all the experience gained over 4 years, which had cost millions. However, money was never a problem at Stuttgart.
I could have as much as I wanted. Nobody said I was spending too much. I don't even know what we spent.
The V12 engines alone reputedly cost £7,400 each in 1938. They were built to the highest standards, as was the entire car. The road holding was certainly the best that could then be obtained and would be difficult to improve on today. Few Grand Prix cars have surpassed the purposeful lines of the 1938 Mercedes. The Mercedes-Benz Rennabteilung speeding along one of the new autobahns. It has been said that the lorries carried enough spares and machinery to build a racing car from scratch. They were heading for the first race of 1938. The first race to the new formula was at Pau, with a field including 2 Type 51 Bugattis. Dreyfus on a Delahaye leads with Caracciola uneasy in the new car. And Hermann Lang spins off. This shot, though cut into the contemporary newsreel of the race, was in fact taken in practice, the car being too damaged to start. A new 3-litre Maserati, fast but frail. Dreyfus on a Delahaye wins, Mercedes finishing second. Pau would be the last occasion on which the German cars would be beaten before the war. For the Tripoli Grand Prix, the Mercedes had to be craned ashore. There were few roll-on, roll-off ferries in those days. Auto Union were unable to get their cars ready in time for Tripoli. They had always lacked a team leader of Neubauer's quality. Mercedes director Seiler and Caracciola. Uhlenlaut supervises the detailed preparation of the cars. Von Brauchitsch has a serious rival, Hermann Lang, a former Mercedes mechanic, which does not please the aristocratic Prussian. Caracciola comes in after a practice lap. The North African heat is searing, and with lap speeds at around 130 miles an hour, the new and virtually untried cars have teething troubles. Engine oil is frothing, and modifications have to be made to the crankcase breather. Careful checks are made of fuel consumption, which was never better than 3 miles per gallon. The Italians have only allowed 3 Mercedes to start, a 1.5-litre race being run concurrently with the Grand Prix, which makes the German drivers unhappy. The 40-lap, 325-mile race starts. The course is covered with fine, wind-blown desert sand. Libya was in 1939 the Italian colony of Tripolitania. The Mahala circuit, the fastest of its day, is said to still exist precisely as it then was. The race is marred by 2 fatal accidents to the 1.5-litre drivers, partly as a consequence of running the 2 classes together. Von Brauchitsch was in the lead, but his car is misfiring due to sand in the supercharger. Caracciola also comes into the pits. The European champion is not at his best. He's suffering from an old leg injury sustained in a practice crash at Monaco in 1933. Von Brauchitsch is away after his pit stop for a supercharger check, fuel and plugs, but Caracciola's stop seems leisurely. He rejoins the race in 3rd place. Hermann Lang's pit stop nearly ends in disaster. As 70 gallons of fuel are pumped into his car, the mechanic misjudges the cutoff. The fuel is methyl alcohol and nitrobenzene. Apart from the obvious fire hazard, Lang is soaked and shouts for water to neutralize the corrosive fluid. Neubauer remains impassive and Lang rejoins the race. Mercedes win 1, 2 and 3, with Lang ecstatically congratulated by his mechanics. Lang's Tripoli average speed of 127.45 on the 3-litre car is only 7 miles an hour slower than his 1937 average on a 6-litre car.
Achtung! 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, los!
Caracciola makes a poor start in the French Grand Prix at Reims. A 3-litre Bugatti, Le Patron's last and unsuccessful Grand Prix car. One of the 2 unblown 4-litre Turbo Darracq, which, like the Bugatti, were outclassed. Caracciola has still not recaptured his 1937 form, and the 3-litre Auto Union seems as difficult to handle as the earlier cars. The race becomes a Von Brauchitsch demonstration as he scores one of his infrequent wins at 101 miles an hour. Mercedes are favoured to win the 1938 German Grand Prix. one of the V12 Alphas, but Nuvolari has abandoned his Italian team and is now driving for Auto Union. Dick Seaman, with a fast practice lap, has won a place on the first row of the grid. Von Brauchitsch is hoping for another major win, since Caracciola is unwell, but he'll start driving number 10. The organisation at Nürburgring is a model of German efficiency. Lesser nations start their races with flags. At Nürburgring, signal lights are used, which fail to work, but they're off anyway. At the South Curve, German cars fill the first 5 places, with an Alfa, a Maserati and a De La Haye following. The 350,000 patriotic spectators line the course for their first look at 3-litre cars in action. They are not to be disappointed. The road holding of the cars is superb and compensates for the lack of litres. Lap times are only slightly down on 1937. Von Brauchitsch and Seaman roar past the grandstand. Each has led the race, but on lap 8, Seaman lost his lead when he had to refuel. The high-revving 3-litre engines are only doing 2 miles to the gallon at the ring. 300 litres of fuel and a tyre change take only 21 seconds. Mercedes are dominating the race, but team manager Neubauer knows that there is still a very long way to go. Von Brauchitsch remains in the lead, but he'll have to stop for fuel and tyres. When Seaman comes in for his second routine pit stop, Von Brauchitsch is already there. Only seconds separate the 2 Mercedes drivers. The well-trained mechanics know this and set about their tasks. Each man has his appointed position, but even the best make mistakes. As Von Brauchitsch's car is restarted, a flame from the exhaust touches off spilt fuel and the car is enveloped in flames. The pit crew fight the blaze, knowing that at any moment the 80-gallon fuel tanks could explode. But Lindemeyer, Seaman's mechanic, calmly restarts the Englishman's car, which Neubauer signals to rejoin the race. Neubauer then tries to knock the Von Brauchitsch car into neutral so it can be pushed clear of the burning fuel. The mechanic succeeds while Neubauer beats at the flames with his famous flag. The fire is out. Von Brauchitsch climbs back in to restart. Seiler advises caution as the car leaves the foam-covered pit. But he was to run off the road shortly afterwards, with the Englishman, Dick Seaman, now leading the German Grand Prix.
Seaman und Lang beherrschen nun überlegen das Rennen. Im großen Preis von Deutschland 1938 Doppelsieg für Mercedes-Benz.
It is Seaman's first, indeed only, win for Mercedes. Hunlein is not pleased. He has to explain the English driver's win to the partisan crowd. But Seaman is congratulated by Caracciola, who finished second. Hunlein seems stuck for words. And even Dick Seaman appears embarrassed. It's all so unlike dear old Donington. Where a huge crowd had turned up, drawn by the stories of the German invasion the year before. It's October, and just 3 weeks after the Munich crisis. The German teams are uneasy and almost pull out. Uhlenhaut and Neubauer received direct instructions from Stuttgart to race. Not unnaturally, Dick Seaman is hoping for another win. The Duke of Kent is formally greeted by Hunlein, clad in English tweeds for the occasion. A new, very fast Maserati. Uhlenhaut told George Monkhouse that if the Germans had prepared them, they could have won. A French Delahaye, it looks old-fashioned, but so do the English perpendicular ERAs. The popular band leader and very good amateur driver, Billy Cotton, is to drive one. Nuvolari is to drive an Auto Union. The pre-war 3-mile Donington circuit was very narrow and very bumpy.
It's well known that the German cars have every advantage over the other entries. Billy Cotton, number 18, finds the tempo pretty hot as he swings round the bend. Seaman, Lang and Miller take a chance and get away with it. But after all, that's bound to happen in a race like this.
Nuvolari has now mastered the difficult rear-engine car and breaks the lap record. Arthur Dobson on his ERA will win the special prize for the first English car to finish 7 laps behind. An English car engine blows up and oil is spilled onto the track. The first victim is the Auto Union of Hasse. Dick Seaman follows in his Mercedes, but he will be able to restart. Von Brauchitsch has an injured hand and he's not at his best. Müller on the Auto Union is now ahead of Nuvolari, who has had a lengthy pit stop. But driving magnificently on the sinuous Donington course, he regains first place. It was to be the last Grand Prix at Donington for 30 years. Dick Seaman in his last English race will finish third. As elsewhere, the 3-litre cars were little slower than the 1937 6-litre. Nuvolari won at 80.49 miles an hour after a truly great drive. It was, however, to be only the second Auto Union win of 1938. For the 1939 season, the Chemnitz cars appeared in their final form. The body was again revised, enclosing the suspension, and redesigned brakes were fitted. In the quest for more speed to defeat their Stuttgart rivals, the V12 3-litre engines were also modified. A 2-stage supercharger is fitted. That's one supercharger pressurizing another, boosting the power output from 420 to 485 horsepower, giving Auto Union a speed of 195 miles an hour. Only 2 Auto Unions survive in the West, one in Munich and this one in England. Nuvolari has now inherited Rosemeyer's position as Auto Union's leading driver. Caracciola is still regarded as Mercedes number 1. He will, however, score only one major win in 1939, which will be Lang's year. The season was, as usual, ushered in at Pau. The drivers all know that it's likely to be the last for some time. Only 3 Mercedes were entered, so Seaman does not get a drive. Neither will Nuvolari, since Auto Union don't enter at all. Lang is favourite, the only possible rival to Mercedes being the 308 Alpha. The French Talbot Darracqs are little more than sports cars. The 1939 Mercedes impress even the French crowd. They're lighter and lower than the previous year's cars, contrasting with the French entrants. the race develops into a duel between Lang and von Brauchitsch. Caracciola having retired, von Brauchitsch was leading when he stopped quite needlessly, it turned out, for fuel. Allowing Lang to win a well-judged race. Lang's greatest drive, however, was to be his next at Tripoli. But the story of that race began in 1938. By that time, in voiturette racing, British ERAs were being outclassed by 1.5-litre Italian Maseratis and a new design, the Type 158 Alfa Romeo, the Alfette. Uhlenhaut and von Brauchitsch had greatly admired these Italian cars when they first appeared at Livorno. What Uhlenhaut did not know was that the Italians, tired of being beaten, had decided to capitalize on their virtual monopoly of 1.5-litre cars by declaring at only 6 months' notice that the Tripoli Grand Prix was to be restricted to 1.5-litre cars. In those 6 months, Mercedes designed and built in complete secrecy 2 new cars. The Type 165s, fitted with V8 1.5-litre blown engines, and at the very last moment entered them. Hopefully, Marshal Balbo starts the race, with Luigi Villarese's streamlined Maserati already trailing oil. The supposed absence of the Germans had attracted a field of no fewer than 28 Italian cars, ranged against the 2 untried Mercedes. To produce a new competitive Grand Prix car in 6 months has been described as a technical exercise of the utmost severity. Tripoli was the only race in which the W165 appeared, though the cars still exist at Stuttgart. It'll come as no surprise to hear that Lang won at 122.9 miles an hour, with Caracciola second. The weather at Spa for the Belgian Grand Prix was very bad. Dick Seaman took an early lead and was 22 seconds ahead of Lang when he skidded off the road at the La Source bend, hitting a tree and suffering fatal injuries. Lang won, but there was no joy in his victory. The 1939 French Grand Prix was disaster for Mercedes. Caracciola, having made a poor start, crashed without injury on the first lap. The circuit had been improved with speeds of up to 185 miles an hour on the straights. The new, unblown 4.5-litre Talbot Darracqs were not fast, but they were reliable. The English driver Raymond Mays is on number 38. By lap 32, only the 2 auto unions of Müller and Meyer are left to represent Germany. All 3 Mercedes and Nuvolari having retired. Meyer very nearly suffered a similar fate when his car caught fire during refueling. Meyer, like von Brauchitsch a year earlier, is able to restart. Unlike him, he'll finish, and in second place, Müller winning for Auto Union. By July 1939, the air was filled with rumors of war. Nine silver cars started on what was to be the last German Grand Prix for 11 years. Lang made an incredible start and on the Südkehrer led the field. Rain showers swept the 14-mile Nürburgring. One of the very few surviving independent drivers, Paul Pietsch, actually got his 3-litre Maserati into a short-lived lead. Von Brauchitsch and Lang were in trouble and soon to retire. The Auto Union of Nuvolari was in second place, but went off the road. Caracciola's Mercedes and Müller's Auto Union led the race, with Pietsch's Maserati third. Hasse was still running, but would soon spin off the course. Caracciola, however, made no mistakes, and the 3 times European champion won his 6th German Grand Prix. It was to be the last race that this very great German driver would ever win. German cars had started in 66 Grandes Épreuves between 1934 and 1939. Mercedes drivers, backed by a matchless organization with state aid, had won 34. Auto Union, starting from scratch in 1934, had produced unconventional cars, also with state aid, and had won 22. The Chemnitz equipe was led by its engineer, the little photographed Eberhard von Eberhorst, whose main problem always was finding drivers who could handle his difficult cars. Significantly, the best were all ex-motorcyclists. The 1939 3-litre Auto Unions, though never easy, were at least possible to drive. In 5 years, the Germans had achieved total domination of international Grand Prix racing. All opposition had been crushed. While it's true that National Socialist government had financed the teams, primarily for reasons of propaganda, it also remains true that money alone can never guarantee success in motor racing. The German achievements were due to superior technology coupled with unsurpassed and disciplined team management. The last race for the German cars was in Belgrade on the 3rd of September 1939, 2 days after the outbreak of the Second World War.